It's me, Alex, the stay-at-home reader. I am filming quickly from the car. You should know by now this is where I get my quiet filming time. Um, kids are kids are about to start a baseball game, but I wanted to take a minute to introduce this video. So Nicole and I, as you know by now, have started a challenge for ourselves in which we revisit books that we read or were supposed to read in high school. So in the description below, there will be a playlist with all the videos related to this subject. This month in June, we started our reading off with A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. A Clockwork Orange is Anthony Burgess's nightmare of the future, a dystopian in which the night is ruled by criminals. And our protagonist is Alex. He's a 15-year-old anti-hero in the truest sense. And through his experience, we get to wrestle with the ideas of good and evil and human freedoms and the importance of self-governance and choice. Nicole and I will discuss this for the most part, trying to be spoiler free. There is a marked spoiler section, so even then we try to be vague, but if you don't want any spoilers at all, you can just scrub ahead until you see the tag is gone. And this is something I was assigned in high school, so this was my suggestion. This was a book that I loved when I read in high school, and Nicole has never read, and I was really nervous about how this was going to go for her. But yeah, so here you go. Here is our discussion of A Clockwork Orange.
Yay, I'm excited to talk about this and to talk about it face to face.
Yeah, this is new for us. For as much as we've buddy read lately, this is just the next step. Next time, I was thinking we're gonna have to now just read in time with each other, because there were so many times, especially in this book, I wanted to live react with you. So that's the next step for us.
Yes, I agree, because there were moments where I was like, has she read this yet?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so A Clockwork Orange. This is what my edition looks like. What does your edition look like?
I have this. I'm not sure what year this is. This is the one that has the 1986 introduction from Burgess.
Nice.
Himself.
Yeah, so mine is called the Restored Edition. And I'm sure we'll get into why that is. But mine has all sorts of extras. There's a foreword, there's an introduction, neither by Burgess. And then it has the text of the book itself. Then there's notes pages on notes for the text. Then there's actually a glossary.
Mm-hmm.
And
which
then,
is probably helpful. Mine did not have any glossary.
Yeah, and I've heard people discuss whether the book should have a glossary or not. And so I do have some thoughts on that. And then there are 6 different essays by Burgess. There's the prologue, the epilogue, essays, articles, and reviews. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 6 of them are by Anthony Burgess.
That's a lot of bonus material.
It is. And it's still, relatively small book. I think all of it in total is 300 some odd pages. Yeah, just over 300 pages.
Oh, that's, and mine's 211, 212. So it is a short story. And I don't know if it goes back to just being young, and because I was introduced to this in high school, which is why we ended up doing this now. I remember it being a much bigger book. Reading it now, I was surprised how quick I got through scenes that definitely took up a larger place in my memory.
Yes, I have the feeling we're going to have that experience a lot in these reads, because I feel like high school reading is notorious for taking one book and stretching it over months.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the first thing to discuss, which I kind of just started, was our own histories with the book. So I read it in high school and I remember loving it at the time. So my expectation going into this was that it would not hold up as much as I wanted it to. Like, I was like, fingers crossed, please still love this book, because like when I think of like what are my favorite books of all time, this would land on that list, even though it's been 20 years since I've read it. So I was kind of afraid and kind of expecting it not to hit the same way.
Was there any particular reason why you were thinking that?
I was worried that the shock value would have caught me as a teenager, and maybe that influenced why I liked it so much. And that now, as a reader who's has more experience reading, is a little more critical, I was thinking, you know, shock wouldn't be enough.
Yeah. Well, and also like shock can be hard to repeat as a reread in general. So, okay.
How about you? You hadn't read this before.
Yeah, I had never read this before. I have to say, I'm still shocked this was required reading for you in high school, having now read it, but we will get to that.
Yeah, we'll get there.
But I had not read this before. I have heard of the book before, but I want to say I even heard of the book as an adult. I'm not sure that it was even like on my radar in high school or college. I knew nothing about the movie, any of that. So going into it, I didn't know what to expect. I owned the book, oddly enough, before we even decided to do this challenge, just because I had heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, okay, I'll try that. And I think the only expectations I had going into it was once we like had put out our videos about the reading challenge, and then I put out my video and you put out your video saying like what books we were reading, I got quite a few comments that were like, be prepared, Nicole.
I saw that.
Yeah.
Every time me feeling really bad, because I was like, I know what Nicole likes and doesn't like generally. Like, she doesn't like violence.
Right. Because even you were like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I didn't know what to expect, other than to expect that there may be some element in the book that I personally might have a hard time with. And then I think right before I started the book, somebody was like, oh, the words, oh, the slang.
Okay.
And then you started reading it like slightly before I got to it, and also mentioned like, oh, I forgot how prevalent the slang is.
Yeah,
So,
I forgot how much of it was in there.
what about you? Like, knowing that you were going back into it, did you look up more this time? Was there anything you were looking for in reading it?
So I made sure to skip the introduction to start, because I feel like that's like a big like faux pas of the publishing industry, is they give too much away at the beginning. So I was like, I'm not going to do that. I want it to be as new of an experience as it could possibly be. But with that in mind, I wanted to be like aware of messaging more than I think I would have been in high school. I wanted to like really dissect like what political messaging am I going to find in this book. Be more, I think it was assigned in school as like an introduction to like a dystopian genre. And so now with more experience, like that's what I wanted to focus on. What makes this dystopian, and how does that actually reflect society that we live in? But other than that, I didn't read any background going into it, but afterwards I did. And I did a little bit while reading. Like I'd be like, oh, I wonder if there's this influence. And so I'd Google that really quick. And then afterwards, I did a little bit of looking into like Burgess interviews. And that might have been a mistake.
Maybe not. We'll get
maybe I
to
should have
that.
just, ignorance is bliss, like left it as it was. But we'll get into that with ratings, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned like your reading experience a little bit in terms of like starting to look at things here and there. So how was the experience of this for you as you were reading it for the second time?
I was really impressed with the language of the novel. And so for me, like, as graphic as certain things were, the novel was fun. Like, I thought it was really clever. And that helped me, I think, not enjoy the like dark parts, but like appreciate that everything has a place in the story. And for that reason, I really liked reading this over again. Yeah, I would say it was a positive reading experience, right? As weird as that sound, knowing the content of the book.
Yeah. No, I get that. I think for me, I had a like a really like roller coaster ride of a reading experience. Especially I think going into it blind, which makes me again think about like introductions to books. I really wish if a book had an introduction, that it was like the kind of introduction that was like, what to know before you read this.
Yeah.
That would have been helpful to me.
Mhm.
Because I started the book and yeah, from page one, I was like, what? What are they saying? What is happening here with this language? And I don't even understand half of what's happening. And there's these weird words. So I had a lot of barriers to entry for this book. I struggled with the language. I very quickly realized there was a glossary in the back. But I was probably like 15 pages into the book when I realized that. And there's enough repetition of the words that I was like, oh, okay, I'm starting to get it. I'm starting to get it. There were a couple that I was still struggling with, so I looked those up real quickly. And I I was tempted to start using the glossary heavily. And then I realized, nope, because every time I flip back to the glossary, I feel like it's pulling me out of the story. Um, and I was starting to realize that part of the experience of reading this story was learning their language and like getting into the character in that sense. And I felt like that was a very different experience than just having the words given to me.
Yeah.
So like you, I really thought that like a fun and unique and exciting part of the book was like learning this language of someone who was very, very different than myself. At the same time, the violence, the ultra violence, as it's called, oh my gosh. Within that first chapter, I came so close to being like,
Can't
Alex,
do it.
I don't think I could do this. Like, whoa, like,
Yeah.
what are we reading? How did you get assigned to this in high school? Who would ever sign this ever? Like, I really had a moment of struggling. But I think at that point, like, I trusted you as a buddy reader.
Aw,
Like,
thanks.
yeah. I'm like, I know Alex, I know her taste, I know our tastes usually align. And for me, it's not that I can't handle violence in books. It's just I've read some books that seem like they're dark and violent just for the sake of being dark and violent, but there's no meaning in it. Um, and I felt like even from the book itself, like it was going somewhere. That was my initial experience. And then we kind of get to the end of part one, and I started part two, and I was like, oh yeah, no, let's do this. So it was good from there, and then we got the end.
Yeah. But like just the very end.
Yeah.
Like most of even that last part, because the book is broken up into 3 parts. Most of that last part I was vibing with until the very, very last chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, it started very low. I feel like I had a steep climb up, and then I was like enjoying the roller coaster and throwing my hands in the air and da-da-da. And then I felt like it was one of those roller coasters that at the end is like
Real big stop. Yeah.
I was like, What was that?
Yeah. That's not the ride I was on. Yeah.
Right. Like, when did I end up on this ride? Like, what happened? Oh my gosh. So I think before we get into the end, we
Mhm.
kind of need to talk about like the different themes and the meaning of the book, because I think that gets us into the end of the book.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to go ahead and start that part.
Well, so I would, and it's funny that like I caught the repetition of this line, but not until the very last time we see it did it hit me how relevant it was. But the very first line of the book is, "What's it going to be then, eh?"
Mhm,
Um, and so I knew that line kept coming up.
mhm.
Didn't think much of it until the very end. It was like, oh, it's signifying choice. And yeah, having your own mind, your a sense of autonomy, and the importance of choosing what path you're going to take. And so that is, I think, the biggest theme in the book.
Yeah, no, that was something that I caught throughout because like each time it comes up in the book, it's repeated in threes, and
Mm-hmm.
then we get revealed who's saying it. So at the beginning, it's Alex, the protagonist, who's saying this to like the members of his gang, and it's the choice of like what violence are we going to do tonight? Like
Yeah.
what are we going to do? You know, later there's a chaplain who says it to him, like what's it going to be? Are you going to always choose, bad, or are you going to choose the path of good? And, on
Yeah.
and on it goes, where we keep getting those words in the mouth of different people. But you're right, every single time it's about like, what choice are you going to make in life or in this moment, but also just overall. And I feel like frequently the choice is between some sort of good and some sort of bad, and like path in life, as well as like what type of person are you going to choose to be.
Mhm. So then I think the main focus of the book in exploring that theme is, if the ability to choose is taken away from you, is that acceptable or is that not? Which now comes into the title of the book, A Clockwork Orange. I didn't know that that was actually like a phrase that was used in England. Um, but I guess the idea is to take something, and the wording of this kind of icked me out. I don't know, something sweet and juicy and turning it into something mechanical. Like I feel like I kept coming across it being described as like turning something juicy into something mechanical. Like,
Yeah,
can we describe it better? I get where you're going, but like,
right. It's yeah, I thought that was, yeah, I also thought like the way it got described, the sweet part every time was kind of like using the word moist, where it's like,
right? Like I was like, can we just say taking something natural and making it mechanical? Like,
loved the way that the title of the book comes up in the book. I love the way that concept is used throughout, and that there's that tension between the things, and that there's even that idea that the way they coexist within the story itself.
other themes that I picked up on, like as it goes, maybe not as much like the central theme, but we definitely had a lot of critique of the criminal justice system and the prison system. Um, I don't know that Burgess was successful in like rounding that theme out. He kind of offers no solutions, which is understandable. Like, I don't think anyone knows what, like, how to, it's a delicate balance, and we have not perfected that. Um, but like, that's one thing where I could see this theme coming up, and I was enjoying that as someone who studied criminal justice in college. Like, I kind of wanted to go a little further with that theme. And then, like we've kind of said, like we get that turn at the end where I'm like, okay, so never mind all that.
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting because going into this book blind, I think one of the downsides of it was I wasn't sure like what it would actually be classified as. But as we got into part two, I was like, oh, this is like more than just like a character study criminal minds type of thing.
Mhm.
This is getting along the lines of like a dystopia. And like you said, like because it brings in those elements of like justice or injustice system. And he also in part two really starts getting into like the politics of things. You start getting this element of like this like oppressive government system being involved in the justice system that's creating more injustices while trying to solve the crime problem. And you get different political sides. And there was just a lot that started happening in part two that I loved. I loved the discussions that
Mhm.
came up there. You get the discussions of like good and evil, and we were talking about theodicy at one point, and just that idea of like how can there be a supposedly good God in a world in which evil exists, and why is there good and evil in the world and
Mhm.
all of that. And I was like, this is exciting. This is amazing that he's in, like very fluidly incorporating all of these ideas into such a short book.
Yeah.
And I love that part.
I feel like religion played a much bigger role in the book than I remembered or expected. And for someone who like would rather not like have like heavy religious messaging in a book,
Mhm.
I really for the most part liked the way it was incorporated. I think if you just consider it on an ethical morality basis in general, um, it made some very valid points.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and I think there was even one part like toward the end. I think I mentioned this too, where I was like, "Wait a minute, is this like a very like pro-Christian? Like, is that going to be the takeaway?" Like, and then I was, "Oh no, remember the first part? There's no way this is a Christian book."
Right. Right. Because I think there was the potential for the book to go into like a theological discussion of all of these things.
Mhm.
But he somehow, even though Anthony Burgess himself is a Catholic, I felt like he did a pretty good job of keeping it in a philosophical
Yeah,
place instead, which I think made more sense for the book. Before we get into our problems that we had with the end, what was like? Did you have a favorite scene? Did you have a favorite line?
so my even though I just said like I don't care for like religious style preaching, my favorite scene is from the prison chaplain, and it's it's him saying, you know, it the line is, it may not be nice to be good, it may be horrible to be good. A little further, he says, does God want goodness or the choice of goodness? Is a man who chooses bad perhaps in some way better than a man who has good imposed on him? I think that basically sums up the theme of the book. Like if we had to isolate one thing that's like, what should you focus on in reading? It's that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think um, definitely my favorite moments in the book were like yours, like the conversations that Alex had with the chaplain. Because I think at the end of the day, um, for me, some of the highs were really when Anthony Burgess, the author, was focusing on like those themes of like good and evil and how does this work out in a person combined with this idea of choice. Um, and my favorite passage was also a passage that was from one of their conversations. And it's that moment when he says, you know, what does God want? Does God want goodness or the choice of goodness?
Yeah.
Is a man who chooses the bad, perhaps in some way, better than a man who has the good imposed on him? And I just love any moment in a book where like there's a question that is being pondered by a character or characters and it's so well delivered that you as the reader yourself have to stop and go, what do I think about that? What do I believe? And yeah, I just thought that those were just like such profound moments, such a really good, like, well delivered idea in the book. You know, I feel like sometimes people feel like they have to read philosophical, like, nonfiction text to think about philosophical ideas. And I'm like, no, you can do it right in the middle of a really good fiction book.
So, should we talk about least favorite thing about the book? Because
Yeah.
again, we have the same favorite and we have the same least favorite.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, in all fairness, I thought at the beginning of the book that my least favorite thing was going to be the violence.
Mm-hmm.
And to my surprise, it was not, because as the book went on, I understood the violence. Like, I thought both the violence and the language were there for a purpose and were pretty effective in doing what he intended to do. The ending of the book?
Yeah, there's a huge like tonal shift, I feel like, where I was like, is this still Burgess writing? What happened? And so I know as we were checking in upon finishing the book, I was like, was he forced by an editor to write this ending? Because it definitely like puts out the fire. It definitely dumps a bucket of water on like the fire that is the rest of the book. Like we're getting this like heightened level of violence, this like extreme reactions or extreme treatment, extreme punishments, and then this like kind of dousing of all that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think initially we'll try and talk about this ending with
Okay.
as few spoilers as possible, but at some point, like, to get it all out, like, we have to spoil it. So I think if we're staying with the non-spoiler, like, I think just getting into some of how this book was put together, right? It's helpful to know that there are two different endings of this book. So there are, in the sort of full original transcript, if you were, Burgess wrote 21 chapters. Now, in that transcript, in that manuscript, he poses the question of there is an epilogue referring to chapter 21. Should we include it or no? So the original UK edition of his book, which was published first, included all 21 chapters. It was later then published with a different publisher in the US with 20 chapters. And there is an unresolvable argument about whether Burgess was part of that decision in making the US edition 20 chapters, or whether that was like the editors doing it without his permission. We won't get into that argument, but if people want to look that up, there's all that going on. So we both had the versions that had the 21 chapters, and that's what my edition means by the restored edition. They restored it to the 21 chapters. Anthony Burgess, I feel like most people would agree, kind of went to his grave eventually saying, no, I always intended it to be the 21 chapters. And people will probably argue until they're in the grave about whether or not that's true.
So I guess in Burgess's defense of that 21st chapter, his feeling is that without it, the book is just fable or allegory, is the way he put it. I see nothing wrong with that. I actually love an allegory, especially in like a dystopian setting. I mean, that they just go hand in hand. Like that seems quite fitting. But what he wanted was something hopeful. In his mind, this last chapter rounds out character development and just made it more real.
Yeah, and it's
I
interesting
disagree.
because, and I think this is why like people have this argument about him, because then there's also other statements that he's made that he claims that the American version had 20 chapters and they left out the last one because the publishers and the American audience felt like the book felt more real by
Yeah.
having 20 chapters, and that it felt fake to add chapter 21 on because that didn't seem like realistic of what would happen, which I agree. It doesn't
Mhm.
seem realistic for a lot of reasons we won't get into yet. But I think my response to chapter 21 was, as I started reading it, I was like, oh, like my immediate thought was, oh, I'm surprised the story is still going. Like, what else is going to happen or going to say? And initially I was like, oh, okay, I see what's happening. I see where this is going. And then something starts happening to Alex that's not immediately clear. And I'm like, is
Yeah.
he having PTSD? Is he having flashbacks? Is he tripping on like some drug? Like, you don't know what's happening. And then you start getting it very rapidly explained by Alex. And then he has like the concluding thought of like the choice he has made. And then the book ends. And I was like,
Yeah, he just seems to have this like unassisted epiphany that with, he's advanced in years now. He's now 18.
right. And
So
he starts at 15. So 3 years
so
in total has gone by.
right, and the way he's writing this or narrating this is that like I'm an old man now.
Right. I was very confused by that because
I
the
thought
entire
much more
book,
years had passed.
yeah, the entire book is told in retrospect. And I agree. Like, it sounds like it's being told by Alex at 40, looking back at what happened in his teen years.
Mhm.
And to end the book and finding out that it's Alex at like 18, talking about what happened to him over the last 3 years, I was like, oh, okay, he just sounded older and more mature.
Yeah.
And I think that added to that confusion that I had at the end of the book.
I also, and I forgot to ask you what you thought about this, but I feel like that last chapter is not in line with the structure of the narration, because it is told to the reader, or it's very you. So whoever the audience is that he's telling this whole story to, in part two, you kind of figure out one thing or like who he's talking to. And then that very last chapter, you're like, wait, so he's not talking to who I thought he was talking to? He's talking directly to me?
You're right. I didn't think about it, but his audience does suddenly change
Mhm.
in that very last chapter because through the entire book, so through the 20 chapters of the book, like he's talking to a very particular group of people, and you don't find out who it is. I guess really like the beginning of chapter 21, you do finally see who it is. But then by the end of chapter 21, it's someone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And the fact that chapter 21 basically starts as chapter 1, like control, copy, paste, names changed, but it's the same scene to start. And then it's just like, so you almost expect him to end up in the same place.
mhm.
And then it's like a sharp turn.
Yeah, like he made a nice loop. You had a nice letter O, and at the very end, it becomes a Q.
Yeah.
And you're like, what just, I mean, it was very startling. So let's get into the spoilers so we can stop alluding as to exactly what the problem was that
Okay.
we had at the end.
All right. So I guess going back to part 2 in order to spoil the end. So Alex ends up in jail for his crimes of part 1. He commits another crime while in jail, and that makes him a candidate, or basically it puts him like as the perfect guinea pig to be used by a political party, basically, who's trying to solve the prison overpopulation with this technique that's going to get him back out into society. And it's basically a very negative reinforcement style conditioning, which makes him physically ill to consider violence, which his whole personality is that he loves violence. Like, he's bad just because he's bad. So now in part 3, he is released upon society again, and he's suffering, really, because finding things have changed while he's been away. The thugs he used to run with are now the police force, and they've beat him up, and he can't defend himself because acting in violence now makes him physically ill, and he ends up in the hands of a opposite political party who now wants to use him as an example. Yeah. And they end up just as manipulative and taking advantage of him in this situation. I'm still kind of being vague about this. Like, I don't want to give everything away.
Yeah, no. I think you're reaching a nice balance. Like, okay. I see what you're doing, and I think you're spot on with it.
Okay, so he tries to harm himself, which they love because it's making their point that this acting government is being cruel, and that's not the way to do things. So, like, he's still a pawn. And what I appreciate is that Burgess really showed that when it comes to like a bipartisan situation, it's really two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, and I think this is where this is a section of the book where you really start to get those dystopian vibes, right? Like, we talked about how there was like 1984 vibes going on at this point in the book, and things were looking dark and bleak, and Burgess really starts you heading in a particular direction about what the overall message of the story seems to be. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. And so then we go into part 3.
Yeah, which is now the party who basically conditioned him to cure him. They realize, like, yeah, we look really bad right now. And so they fix him and they say, "You're better now." And he says, "Yep, I'm cured for sure." There ends the American version. Yep. And there ends the Kubrick film, which caused a whole other, I guess, controversy. And I think that's where Burgess got really kind of defensive of his book. Because now the 21st chapter, we have Alex free to be violent again, free to act out all the criminality that lives inside him to his content. And he
right. And this is where it kind of closes that loop where he is right back where he was at the beginning.
Like, the scenes very much like even mirror each other, the conversations, the places they go to. But then the breaks, he's bored.
Yeah.
He's over it. He went from being the youngest of the group in the first chapter to now he's the oldest of the group. And there's a big motif around aging, I think, in that chapter. Fashion and style is also a big part, I think, of Burgess creating this like near future alternate Britain. And so the current trendy in fashion thing was, I think the way it's described is that boys would just shave the middle of their hair and let the sides grow in, like male pattern baldness, and that girls had their hair dyed white. So you just get this like almost like want to be older.
Right.
So like I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. And now Alex is carrying around a picture of a baby in his wallet, which his friends think is weird. It is weird. Random ad that he likes, and he comes to the conclusion that he's ready to get married and start a family, and he could be done with all the violence, murder.
And I mean, like, I think the important thing to remember is that this is happening within a matter of pages.
Yeah.
Like, in a matter of paragraphs. Like, it's not like chapters building up to this. It's like we see Alex, he's back to the same thing as before, just as you're starting to think like, oh, nothing has changed. Like they did all this, went through all this, and now he's just back to where he was at the start. And then he's like, oh, but my head was feeling a little funny, and I have this picture of a baby, and da 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 da. And like, you get the sense that something weird is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then Alex walks home and he's like, he runs into a friend who
Right.
was an old gang member, and he sees that guy who's now married at 20, who was the oldest guy in the group when he was
When they were
15.
running together.
Yeah. And they have a conversation, and short conversation that Alex basically gets up and is like, you know, I think I just want to settle down and get married and have a kid. And you know what? I'm 18. I've grown out of everything. That that was past me. That was me in my youth. I was just being crazy those last couple of years, and now I'm grown up. The end.
Yeah. And yeah, you're right. It's when he runs into that friend in the cafe that is like the big, like, put the brakes on this roller coaster. I just feel like the extent of what they were up to when they were young was not reflected in this last chapter, because so I compared this to Catcher in the Rye so many times. Like, if this was just a coming of age story, and yeah, you had some like young kids who were up to trouble, who would shoplift or, get into like, little tussles.
Yeah,
That's
TP
one
the
thing.
the neighbor's house, knock books out of people's hands.
Yeah, like that's one thing where like, okay, we can just assume you've grown out of this. But the way that the book starts to end where it did, I think we threw out the term cop out, and I've heard other people in other places say the same thing. That's really what it felt like. At the end of the book, you have this whole, don't worry about trying to fix him. Boys will be boys. They'll grow out of it eventually. Just ride it out.
Yeah, which is, it's at best a horrible message.
Terrible take.
Because like you said, you've got to go back to chapter 1 and even his time in prison and even after his treatment, where I mean, he's not just having like, I'm a scrappy kid kind of thoughts and actions. He's having like, I'm a psychopath. I am, running over animals for fun. I am involved in multiple acts of SA against adult women, children, virtually everyone. I am brutally beating people to the point of death. Like, I mean, we're not talking like misdemeanors here. We're talking things that even when he gets sentenced in the book, I'm like, that's it?
Yeah.
That's his sentence? Like, I'm questioning the amount of time he was like sentenced for jail. And everybody else in the book is questioning whether or not he's actually been punished enough. Like, we didn't really talk about that, but he talks about how like, hey, I've been punished, I've been punished, I've been punished. And he has in a lot of ways, but other people in the book, when they think about just what he's done just to them as an individual, don't feel like he could be punished enough. And that's a whole nother question to look at. But then when you have the book conclude with, he was just being a scrappy teen. I brought up myself Chanel Miller's book,
Mm-hmm.
Know My Name, and just her whole situation. And I haven't read that book, but I did know about like her actual situation. And that was pretty much what was told to her in her court case was, the basic overarching ending judgment for the guy in her case was like, well, he's a boy. He was just being,
Yeah,
we don't want
that
to
was the
ruin it.
defense, was like, I think his father's line was, "Are you going to let 20 minutes of action ruin his whole life?"
Right. And if you read this book at the end, the answer is no, you shouldn't do
You
that.
shouldn't do that. Yeah.
So to say that the ending makes the book unbelievable
Yeah.
is like, I mean, not even just the idea, because he's not even trying to posit to you the idea that someone could eventually grow out of these behaviors, which I felt like even that, to some extent, given the behaviors, is a bit unbelievable. But I think it also stretches like your sense of imagination to believe that somebody could grow out of it that quickly.
And I think Burgess kind of forgot the character he created. Like reading this, like I want to diagnose Alex with all the things. He's a narcissist. He's acting like a psychopath. Like brain chemistry wise, he's not right. So to now get to where Burgess is saying like it's just a natural part of growth. There's a part even in the introduction I have where Burgess is like, I enjoyed writing the things he did. Like I would never do them, but like I enjoyed imagining them. No,
Oh,
no, this is where
no.
like I should not have read more than the actual novel.
Right. Oh, gosh, you never shared that with me.
My goodness, I feel like we could talk about like what's wrong with chapter 21 forever.
We
Um,
could. So I guess we should move on.
yeah. So I guess the next thing I wanted to talk about is because this is our high school rereading project, like what about this book would make it a part of a high school reading list?
I don't know.
And I think it's chapter 21.
Mm,
I think it's chapter
interesting.
21, which is wrong.
That's
But so
like almost worse.
I shared with you that I have a used copy. And at the very end, someone put this little inscription in there. And from the tone of it, which I got a kick out of this because the person who inscribed you're not going to be able to see it, but it's Alex. So someone named Alex read this book about an Alex, which includes another Alex. And here I am, Alex, reading like with that copy. So I got a kick out of that. That kind of like blew my mind. But he kind of sums it up as like this note to for anyone who reads this after me, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just growing up. It sucks, but it's worth it. Trust me. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of sweet. But you're missing the point of this book, or like you have the wrong takeaway of this book.
Yeah. Yeah. And the book leads you to have that takeaway. But
Mm-hmm.
like you said, in light of the character and the characterization, like these things just don't line up. And I didn't think about like as we were reading it, like why would this be taught in high school? But and I still don't know that I can say why I think it was or should be. But I did think about it in terms of like where do I think this book has a place in terms of if it's taught? And I do think it has corollaries. Like I mean, we talked about lots of other books
Mm-hmm.
in relation to this book. And to me, this felt like a book that you kind of build up to, as opposed to like one that's introduced really early on. Like to me, I felt like if you were going to progress in this line of dystopians, because sans chapter 21, I really feel like this book is written as a dystopian novel. Um, and I feel like, you know, if I was going to put it on a progression of reads leading up to Clockwork Orange, I would be starting with the Animal Farm, like a
Mm-hmm.
really gentle, quick, fast introduction into like all of this allegorical dystopian types of things. I would take someone at some point into 1984. Like if I was going to teach a book like this, that would probably be the book I would teach in high school. And then the next book I could see going into would maybe be a Clockwork Orange, which again, if I was thinking about time frame, like I could see in college. I could see this book taught in college, surrounded by other materials to compare and contrast to, because I think it is an interesting book to study. Like there's a lot to think about, including the chapter 20 versus chapter 21 ending. So I think it's a book that's worth having taught, but I just think there's barriers to entries. I think there's a problematic message at the end, and I think there's so much ultra violence throughout the book that I think there's other books that could get you to the same place and better, that aren't going to traumatize you along the way.
Yeah. So I'm like, in all this consideration of why it was taught in high school, and like I did see, I think at least one other person when we put out our required reading tag, I'm pretty sure I saw someone else mention having read it in high school. But then even on my own answers to the tags, people were like, I am surprised that like we didn't read that till college. My high school was a magnet school that their philosophy was like, we're doing college in high school. And so I wonder if that's why specifically my school chose to teach it. And so when I'm thinking about it, I think from like a mechanics side of things, like the linguistics in this book are fantastic. I think that's something fun to explore in a class. And then just it's got the dystopian themes, that whole like beware future generations, like this could be your fate, that I feel like you kind of want. I was a senior reading this, so like I feel like that's we're sending you off into the real world, do things right, like make it better please. Kind of could be why this would be involved. But I remember because the way my school was set up was there were concentrations like within the school, and so mine was in medical science like focus, and I feel like they were trying to give us a lot of opportunities to consider ethics. So I think that could have been why it was included in mine specifically. But I think like generally as a high school assignment, I'm glad I read it in high school because it stuck with me and it brought me here to reread it. But I guess the next question, we do have a little outline here. You see all my notes. Is this an appropriate book for a high school setting? And by appropriate, I just mean, can high schoolers engage with it?
I think they can. I definitely think high schoolers could. I think it would be one that, like, if you were kind, you would give content warnings ahead of time. I think it would be critically important if you were teaching this book to really press that ending and have a deep discussion about how this book ends, and different understandings of that and that kind of thing. So that's my thoughts. What about you?
I think, yeah, you have to have the right kind of like, I think you need a teacher to really kind of guide you through this in terms of preparing you for the content. It was news to my mom 20 years after the fact that I read this in high school. So I mean, she was busy, she was working, but I feel like nowadays parents would be on top of the reading list and saying, no, not in our classrooms. But I think, like, I remember my class being able to engage with this book. And so, yeah, I would never try to ban or censor a book and say, like, no, you can't read this at this level. I just think you have to be careful with a book like this.
I could say this, that for teenagers to read this book, I would rather them experience it in a classroom setting than not.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yep.
So that gets us to the big question. What did we rate it?
Do you want to go first? Or do you want me?
Do you have it written
Well,
down on a piece of paper?
so historically, I rate things higher than you do.
True.
So
True.
yeah, do you want to hold up? I guess the out of 5-star rating is that what you have, or do you have
I
a
didn't
letter?
do mine out of 5. I just did my letter grade.
Okay, I have that too. Ready?
Okay. 3, 2.
Oh.
So we're staying pretty consistent.
Yep, we're consistent, if nothing else. So, as a star, that's a 4.5 out of 5 stars.
Wow.
So I have an equation. Ready? It was a 5-star read for me in high school. So that's like my starting, like, not that we did 5 stars back then, but that's my starting point. And like 95% of the way through the book, I was like, no complaints. Like, yes, violent, yes, graphic, yes, uncomfortable, but it all makes sense in the context. So no complaints. Last bit, as we've discussed, to great lengths, didn't like. So that dropped the book down for me. And that in combination with Burgess's introduction dropped the book down for me, where I'm sitting at like a 4-star rating now. But Burgess ends his introduction saying, what am I going to do? I wrote what I wrote. Decide for yourself. And so that was me taking back the ability to read and take what I want from it and let myself give it a 4.5 star. So
fair. That's all very fair. So I think for me, kind of following by like wild ride that I went on, those first couple of chapters for me, I was like, oh, if this isn't a DNF, this is going to be like a 2. That is like where it started. And, but like by the time I got to the end of part 1, it was like, it was creeping into 3. And I was like, okay, well, let's keep seeing. Part 2, it skyrocketed all the way to a 5.
wow.
I was like, oh, this is going to be a 5-star read. Like this is going strong. This is going well. And I was like starting to be afraid, because I was like, this is having potential to like ruin it, because I'm like, he's really created a complex situation, especially when it started to become clear that there wasn't a good side to this political equation. I was like, how are you going to resolve this? And then as we got into the final chapter, and I was like, you're still going? And you're still going for a while. And it started to creep down. So I was like, okay, this could maybe still be a 5, but I'm doubting it. And then by the end of that chapter, it bottomed out. So I gave it a B-, but if I gave it a star rating, it would be a 4.
So we're not far off. Like, I think we tend to be that half star when we go with Storygraph ratings. That tends to be our difference.
Yeah. So our star ratings are pretty consistent, which is why I'm always like, okay, if you like what I read, you're probably also going to like what Alex reads. And I know you read like everything that would be a 4-star or better for me, because that's like guaranteed like 4.5, 5-star read for you. So whereas if you're like, oh, I gave it a 3, I'm like, oh, there's no way I'm reading that.
Yeah. I know that's become like my measure too, is like, all right, you try this, and depending on how you rate it is if I would even pick it up.
And I'm the same way. I'm like, did you read this? What did you get it? And like the second like anything's at a 3 for you, I'm like, I'm not even cracking the book open, because it's just been that consistent for us. But yeah, so I think my B-, like for me, just represents like how low it got with like all the background information, which I think is interesting, like how much that can affect how we feel about something. Because I felt like probably at the end of the book, I felt like it was more like, like B+ range. where it was a solid 4, it was a good 4, and I'm like, okay, not everybody nails the ending, but like everything else about the book came together, made sense for me. I felt like, okay, you know, maybe you just need some content warnings going into the book, but like it makes sense. It's not just there for no purpose or to just for shock. Like it's serving a purpose and characterization. But then, like you said, as like we read background stuff, as we read more about like this whole confusing, should there have been this chapter or not, and then Burgess's own thoughts, like it was hard to not let that affect my letter grade, even though it still kept my star rating in the 4.
Yeah, and that's all stuff that like I don't typically go into with every read. So I think that's why I decided to like kind of let go of that, because that was definitely dragging my rating down. And then I said, like, no, this is going to be for me, like personally, novel on its own is how I ended up with my rating.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I did that, I could be convinced to bump my letter grade up to like a B.
Okay. So that's like my personal reader rating. If I had to rate this as a classroom choice, which we kind of already discussed in terms of like, do we think it's suitable for a classroom? There I would probably end on like a C, like middle of the road. You could do it. You have to do it right. I think my major concern would be that the violent content is distracting and becomes the main focus for a young reader. And so, like I said at the beginning of this, I was worried that that's what I attached to in the book, because, you know, 20 years later, I don't remember everything about the book, but I remember that it was extreme. And I think you mentioned like building up to this book, and that's something I have been thinking about. Like, I agree. I would almost, and I'm pretty sure it was a genre study. Like, I think we studied dystopias, and I would do that, but I would probably stick to Orwell. I was thinking specifically 1984. And then maybe just like in teaching the genre as a whole, say like, hey, this book exists. These are the things it does.
So I think we have talked about books that we think are like this. I think for me, like hands down, I would say 1984 to me was the most like correlated one. And I would actually argue that even with that ending, that I think this is better than 1984.
Okay, so I need to reread 1984. I borrowed it. I borrowed the audio on Hoopla and then realized it was German. And my library doesn't have the English version.
I've been there. I've been there.
So I wasted one of the borrows for this month on a book I can't read. But I've been wanting to revisit that, and interesting that you think this is better than that. Because I think 1984 is the more popular, the more generally read one than this one.
Yeah.
So I kind of broke my read-alikes up into the different parts of the book. So part 1 to me was Catcher in the Rye. As weird as that seems, because they're very different tonally, I think the characters' internal kind of othering of themselves from general society is similar. It's like alternate universe Holden Caulfield is Alex.
if Holden Caulfield, like if that sanatorium didn't work for him.
Yeah, and I think also the structure of the narration is very much the same between both books. And then
if you liked your story being told with this type of point of view,
right, the like directly to you from some point in the future, they do the same thing in that sense. Part 2, like you said, reminds me more of like the 1984. We're getting like these machinations that like aren't our world, but we can imagine them, and then that goes into part 3. But part 3 for me, and I think I mentioned this to you on Voxer, I got Invisible Man vibes at some point.
Yes.
Because you get this character who's being used for like the parties that he's with, they're using them to further their agenda without actually being concerned about what's best or right for this person. And that also has that speaking to you directly, the reader, from like another place, and we're going to come full circle and get back to there.
Yeah. We get a lot of like, what is it? Second person going on. And I think the other, I had all the same books. I think the other one, I don't even know that I mentioned this one in all our talking, that that narration style reminded me of, especially part 1. For me, even more than Catcher in the Rye, would be The Wasp Factory. I don't know if you've read that book.
I haven't read that. I did see you read that one.
Yeah, like, again, these are people who could like be besties. Like, you have equally like strong narrator voice, second person narration going on, you, I, talking to some implied audience, but equally psychopathic and doing stuff that you're like, you're talking about somebody else being the crazy one, but I'm pretty sure we all know who the psychopath is. Like, and interestingly enough, the ending of A Clockwork Orange brought me back to the ending of The Wasp Factory, which I also felt like had a very questionable end, that I was like, I feel like you just excused everything away in a manner that I'm really not okay with, like the way it was handled. So
I wonder if there's a book that can stick the landing then, that's like got like a similar tone and theme, and like I get how that would be difficult in everything that this book explores, but then did you bite off more than you can chew? Like, maybe you weren't ready to wrap this up then and publish it.
Yeah, like, is it impossible for someone to write a book from the point of view of basically a hard criminal, or somebody who's at least engaging in very criminal activities, and still end the book in a satisfying manner? Which brings us to like our final idea of, what do we want to read next? Is there something that this book has made us want to read?
So at some point I was like, well, Crime and Punishment has to go on my TBR now, and then realized I actually own 2 copies of it. So, oops. And then I was like, I feel like because I was enjoying the discussion of the justice system and like the prison system, I should throw a nonfiction somewhere on my like, further reading list in relation to this book. And I think Angela Davis has a book that is on the current prison system.
That does sound familiar. I think you're right. I can't think of what it's called.
Something about prisons being obsolete, or something along those lines. Which I thought of that one this morning because I was like, the only thing I can think of is the new Jim Crow. I know that one addresses the prison system specifically from like a disproportionate, Black versus white ratio of incarceration. So I think that's going to be on my mind. That's the theme I wanted to explore more in this book, is the justice system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, the 3 books that I came away with were Crime and Punishment, like you. That was like the very next book that I was like, this now makes me curious about that one, which I'm excited about because that is on plan. It's on tap for my book club. So might have to have you special guest on that one. And then another book, because I was also thinking like of a nonfiction version, is actually Executioner's Song. I don't recall a lot of that book other than that, it's this weird overlap between nonfiction and fiction. But I read that in high school. And I remember that it's a lot about this person who's in the prison system, who I believe is going to be, is set to be executed. And even the structure of how the novel is written is very strange, as I recall. And it's, to my satisfaction, an extremely long book.
Yeah, you like those big ones.
Yeah, yeah.
Which you've been a good influence on me, because that's something, like, I let big books intimidate me, and I have to say lately I've been more willing to pick them up.
It's all part of my evil plan.
Yeah.
And then the final book that I was just thinking of now as we were talking is American Psycho.
Okay, I did think of that at some point, 'cause I remember when we've discussed like being okay with certain levels of violence. I watched that movie, I think my freshman year of high school, and I was not okay with it. I think I watched it multiple times too, and there was a kid in my class who absolutely loved it, and I was like, dude, I'm judging you. So I have been wondering lately how I would do with it now as an adult and in novel form.
Yeah, same. But it's now like, yeah, I feel like this, like you said, like the combination of this novel and then like feeling like it's not landing right is like taking me down this rabbit hole of, okay, now I need to start reading more books about criminals, like in criminal minds and from the perspective of like crime and all of that, because it does bring up a lot of really fascinating things to talk about.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, we have been going for quite a while,
and
are going to have to figure out how to edit all this. So, I don't know if there's anything else you want to say before I end the recording.
No, I definitely do recommend this book. Like, generally, I would just be careful. And I think this is a book that spoilers are okay and might actually be recommended.
Yeah. I think it's a book that is, I would say the same thing. It's worth reading. There is stuff to get out of it. But if you can find someone who has written or recorded a what to know before you read, like that would be extremely valuable. And like you said, like having spoilers, and especially I would say spoilers of knowing what's to come after the opening of the book would be really helpful, because I think it's what would help you get through that first part of the book.
Yep.
So, all right. Well,
so here is our report card. So we get to put in the grade now for our first book off of our Ultimate High School Rereading Challenge, TBR. We named this a little bit too long. But yeah, so here is the grade for A Clockwork Orange. And if you want to read along with us, we will be announcing our next reads and community posts. This is a very relaxed reading schedule. But you can check out our TBR video, my TBR video with the list of all the books we're going to read for this challenge. And if you want to follow along, there will be a link below also to a Google Drive file where you can download a PDF copy of our report card. You have two choices. You can read the books that we've put together for our TBR, or you can answer the questions of our tag video if you want and build your own TBR of books personalized to your high school experience. So I hope you enjoyed this. I know we did. We loved making this and reading together and discussing this, and would love some feedback. Did you read A Clockwork Orange? And what are your thoughts?